going on, everybody? Welcome back to Known Profits. I'm here again with my buddies J.R. Roberts, Drew Myers, and our special guest today, Tenisa Frye from Family Promise. How you guys doing today?
Good.
Yeah.
Doing well.
It's still fall.
It is still fall.
The leaves are on the ground.
It is. One of the things I love about fall is the leaves, which you touched on.
Gosh.
But Kyle, that's the big thing. Tenisa, I want to ask, what is your favorite fall activity? Do you have one?
So it has to be around the leaves. I would say nature walks. Like you're able to see the trees and just the different colors. You don't get to see that in many states, but you can see it in Michigan. So definitely the nature walks.
One of the things that I always tell people about Michigan, I lived away for a while, is they're like, oh, you get snow and you get all this other stuff. And I know I like summer. Everyone knows I like summer. It's my favorite holiday. But we have these beautiful 4 seasons. And as long as you find something to do in the colder weather, it's fantastic because then we're rewarded with a beautiful summer. So, but yes, happy fall.
Yeah. I think for me, I'm a big Michigan fan. Tenisa, you as
Go
well.
Blue.
Go Blue. A little nervous about this year. So I hope that we're talking and that they're winning, but I'm not super confident, Tenisa. We came off a national championship last year.
So here's the thing with me in Michigan, because I love them so much, I don't care where they land. I still feel like I'm just going to cheer them on regardless. Like, so I'm always like, go Blue, even when they're doing bad. They're like, they're not having a good season. Doesn't matter. Go Blue.
I love it.
So I'm faithful to my team.
Yeah, you Spartans. What do you think about that, huh? JR and Drew. Yeah.
We just set low expectations every year.
That's
We
fair.
understand being faithful to our team.
That's fair. JR, what about you? What's your favorite fall thing?
My favorite, going off the leaves, is literally that drive up north. And right in October, we start to see that change all across the state from down low all the way to the Upper Peninsula. So I love doing the drive, love camping. You can still get out and camp
Some
in the
good fall
outdoors.
fishing, too.
Fall fishing, yep. You still go fishing.
Nice.
It's true.
Nice.
Well, like we said, you guys, we are excited to be here today. Tenisa Frye from Family Promise of West Michigan is with us. She's the CEO of Family Promise, and excited to talk to her a little bit more about what she's doing.
Yeah. Tenisa, why don't you start by telling us about yourself?
Yes. So we're talking about West Michigan, and I'm actually from Flint, Michigan. So I started, but what's interesting is that I've lived here longer than I've lived in Flint. I left Flint at 17 to leave for college to go to Grand Valley. And I met my husband at Grand Valley, college sweethearts.
All right.
We got engaged, and he's from Detroit, and we're like, okay, where are we going to live? We both were like, easy. We're staying in Grand Rapids.
Nice.
And so we decided to stay in this area. So I've been here for quite a long time now. But I like to say, just like the fall leaves, I've had a colorful career journey. My degree is in biomedical sciences, and I started in that space. But once I got married and time went on, I needed to pivot, and I'm all about pivoting with purpose. So I opened a daycare center.
Oh,
And I did that. And after the time for my daycare center, I was ready to do something different. I started working for Farmers Insurance. And Farmers Insurance was supposed to be my pit stop before I did the next big entrepreneur thing. But I got sucked into the culture. And one of the things I got sucked into was Family Promise. At that time, Family Promise was a partner based on their corporate citizenship strategy. So I had an opportunity to do some philanthropy and volunteering and things of that nature. And that's how I kind of got connected and have changed my path. But I've always been service driven. Like, I just love volunteering. It's my thing. So that started at a young age, but yeah.
So what was it about your experience working, volunteering with Family Promise through your employer that led you to end up wanting to work for them?
Yeah, I will tell you, it started with a video. There was a video that showed this young lady who was helping people repair their credit and get housing. And she was homeless herself. And so she's, working in a bank. helping other people in the community, and she's living in her car with her son. I saw that video and it blew my mind. And then the second video was narrated by a child going through a homeless experience. And, you know, in church they have the offering plate. I was like, just give me the offering plate so I could just dump all my money into it. But I was really engaged. And I remember going up to the representative from Family Promise. I said, how do I get involved? And so it started there. And then at Farmers, I did a service operations auction. We did the golf outing. We did all of these things. And so then by this time, the person that was representing Family Promise reached out and she said, the CEO wants to meet with you. And I was like, really? I didn't even know who the CEO of Family Promise was. But I met with her for breakfast and she asked if I would be interested in joining the DE&I committee. And she said, with the intent of joining the board after you serve on the committee for 12 months. Well, I probably served on the committee maybe 3 months before I submitted for the board. And then I was eventually leading the DE&I committee. So it started there. So then I was serving on the board for several years, sat in the space of vice president of the board. I was hosting the galas, campaign chair, just all of these things.
While you're working,
while I'm working a full-time job, yes. But I just really love the mission, and I made a decision probably years prior because I was working with like 10 organizations a year because I just got so much fulfillment for just serving. And I said, you know what, I'm only going to work with 3 organizations and Family Promise is going to be one. And so I decided I'm going to work with Family Promise, West Michigan Aviation Academy, and my church. And I said, that's where I got to be more intentional with my time. And so that meant Family Promise got more time.
What was one of the biggest surprises? Because my two colleagues here on the podcast are both in the nonprofit space. I am not. From my primary employment, what was the biggest surprise to you coming from a prior career of entrepreneurship and traditional business type environments going to a nonprofit?
Probably all of the great benefits of the corporate side of things. Like nonprofit, you're constantly thinking about budgets, period. Whether it's corporate or nonprofit. But when I think about like the office I sat in the corporate space versus now, it's different, Or when, in the corporate space, when you think about rewards and recognition. Rewards and recognition does not happen enough in the nonprofit space. These people are doing wonderful things, but there's not always this big platform for rewards and recognition. And in the corporate side, there was. So like I won this Difference Maker Award on the farmer side, and they flew me to California. I was on the farmer's float. I got to be on top of the farmer's float. I got to bring my husband with me. I went to the Rose Bowl parade. I was in the Rose Bowl parade. Like, you don't get those kind of benefits.
You don't get that at Family Promise?
No, not at all.
Are you kidding? Okay. Wow.
And so that was a big adjustment for me, as well as, honestly, the smaller dynamic of teams. I come from a company of almost 20,000 employees and working with different people across the country. And then to go from that to, when I started, it was probably 20 some odd employees. And I mean, we've since expanded. But yeah, just some big differences in that respect. But I think the other piece is on the farmer side, the things that I loved the most was corporate citizenship, community partners, volunteering. And the benefit of the nonprofit side is I get to do that all the time. Mm-hmm. And so the things that I love the most out of my corporate role are the things I get to do. I almost feel like I'm getting paid for my hobby. It's a dream role.
And I have some questions, follow-up questions about the employee experience later. But before we get there, share about Family Promise and what you're doing and What drew you to the organization?
Right. I would love to share. So, Family Promise is a nonprofit with a staff of 61 amazing people who are looking to end homelessness one family at a time. And we do that by partnering with community organizations to provide basic needs, emergency shelter, affordable housing, all encompassed in stabilization. And what that looks like is we offer diversion services where if we can keep a family safely housed, we're going to do that. And so that may mean that family is staying with the grandmother and the grandmother says, well, my bill is getting, a little high because there's so many people in my house and the grocery bill's high. We may have discretionary funds or some financial assistance where we can help keep that family there for, a month until they can find a better job opportunity. The other piece is we work in emergency shelter. Currently in West Michigan, we know that to meet the need of families, we need a minimum of 80 rooms of shelter. We currently have 51. And that's 51 through some private funding where we own some spaces, as well as partnerships with organizations like Mel Trotter. But something new that we did last year is we purchased a church, Wyoming Park United Methodist Church. This is a church that has been a partner for years, and they approached us and to see if we were interested in purchasing their building while they maintain about 20 to 30% for congregational purposes, and we maintain that 70 to 80 for emergency shelter. So we were able to add 11 rooms of emergency shelter through that partnership. And the affordable housing piece, we have a program called Partners in Housing where we invest about $30,000 into a mobile home. We move families in, our housing team renovates it, brings in our volunteers to beautify it, and the family moves in. As the family goes through our program, we gift them the title so they have home ownership. And so we're offering home ownership through affordable housing. And one of the innovative things we did last September is we purchased 2 manufactured home communities. So now we have a social enterprise where we own these 2 mobile home parks off of Eastern. And in this situation, we're able to protect and preserve affordable housing, but also able to create some revenue to continue to fund our programming. And so all of our programming is encompassed with stabilization. I like to call stabilization our bread and butter because our stabilization component is what keeps families safely housed. We're able to provide financial literacy, career prep and readiness, the mental health and physical health resources. But the program is set up to provide accountability, ownership, and give families a space to fail forward.
That's good. That's really good. Tenisa, I had a question too. Are there any specific moments of impact? I know there are, but like that you can think of with Family Promise where you're like, wow, this really highlights the work that we're doing. Again, I'm sure you have every day, right? You have moments of impact, but like, is there one that sticks out in your mind?
Yeah. Well, some of it is just based on our impact data. We've tried to be intentional of just really capturing our data and the families that we're serving. When I look at last year, we diverted 614 families from going into homelessness. Oh, so they were able to stay safely housed. We served 1,097 families, and that translates into over 4,000 individuals. And what's very interesting, the dynamic of those 4,000 individuals, 2,601 are children.
Wow.
And so being able to serve that number of people through our programming, it's huge. It's bittersweet. You want to provide the service and help people, but you also don't want that many people to be in need. It's like we're trying to work ourselves out of jobs, honestly, because you don't want family homelessness to exist. But the big that's a big impact just based on our programming and being able to open a new shelter and being able to, have manufacture home communities and create more opportunities for housing.
Yeah, no, JR, I'm sure you feel this too, working in nonprofit, right? We talk a lot about that. Like, we're working towards a better tomorrow, a better future. working yourself out of a job, right? But there are
Right.
obviously needs, and there's work to do in the community. So the fact that you guys are such at hard work doing that and providing those resources, that's big time.
Yeah, I really think what you said on stabilization really struck home with me as I think about these two new mobile home parks that you were sharing about. Tell us a little more about that, and what are some of the long-term goals with the stabilization side of what the work you do is?
Right. So with the stabilization side, we have a program that we follow through Empath Mobility called Bridge to Self-Sufficiency. And so basically, our case managers are walking along this bridge with the families that we serve. And so that's where you're getting those components of, the financial literacy and all of the resources. And one of the things that I want to do, like I'm always thinking about elevating. And so right now, as they're going on that journey, we have resources that we can connect them with. And in our, what we call garden level of our building, we have this table. A table of resources and pamphlets. And it's beautiful because it's like, okay, resources at your fingertips. But every time I walk past that table, I'm like, families that are going through trauma, if I give them 3 pamphlets, it's not likely they're going to read those pamphlets. I need to elevate my partnerships so that I can connect my families directly to a resource where I can say, you know what? I can call up a place and say, I have 2 families coming and they need help in this area. So I really want to move from a table of resources to an opportunity to really plug in our families and engage. And one way we've been able to do that, we have a new partnership with Exalta Healthcare, and we'll be able to connect, directly with them and refer our families over to Exalta in the same way, honestly, that we have like our partnership with Mel Trotter. So what I find, and this is a quote that I say all the time to foundations, I say, Family Promise does great work. We do better work when we come together with other housing agencies, but we do our best work when we come together as a community. So the more that we can partner with other organizations, the more we'll be able to elevate the resources for the families we serve.
Housing is such a important piece of our community, and it's a fundamental need. What are some of the causes of homelessness, and what are some of the misperceptions of homelessness as well?
Right. So I'm going to start with the misconceptions because I do feel like there are very many I will say just biases that exist when people think about someone being homeless. And the first thing that I hear is, why don't they get a job? And then I can say, a lot of our families work. And sometimes there's 2-parent households and they both work. And then the reason that they end up calling us is because there's a lack of affordable housing is one of the number one reasons we see people in the homeless space. So a lack of affordable housing. The other reason we see is family breakup. So it may be a couple that is no longer together, or it could be 2 sisters and one decides to relocate, but it's going from a 2-income household to a 1-income household. That's a big one. Lack of a support system. It can be that someone's new to this area and just not quite engaged yet. We also see domestic violence. In those scenarios, we partner with Safe Haven. We partner with the Y because they're the experts in the space. So we want to make sure our families get the help that they need. And then the other is medical crisis. It may be a situation where your child is diagnosed with a terminal illness, or it could just be the flu. But if the parent has to leave work to accommodate their child to get them to a doctor's appointment, or the school calls and says you need to come pick up your child, it can impact their work situation. There are certain jobs where there's point systems, and if you leave, you get written up and get points. And so you're either losing hours or potentially losing your job. So medical crisis definitely can push a family into homelessness because now they're once employed and they either have not enough hours or no job at all.
Yeah, I think assumption, right, is something that is so easy to fall into from people who maybe are outside the organization or just in our community in general, right? We assume that, yeah, you're homeless because you're lazy, you're homeless because you don't get a job, you're homeless, or for me, right, it's food. Like, well, why aren't you feeding your kids? Well, there are a lot of factors, a lot of things that go into that, right? And so half the time, for us, and I'm sure for you too, Tenisa, is like, how do you break down those stereotypes, right? Like, there's a lot of complexity when it comes to the conversation of homelessness, of poverty. And so how often do you guys find yourself, and I think I know the answer to this, but just advocacy work, right? Like talking about breaking down stereotypes. I'm guessing that's part of like your mission, but how often are you actively doing that as a staff and as a team?
Right. In so many different ways. So we would host these lunch and learns. And at the end of the lunch and learn, you put up the slide and say, how do you want to be involved? One of the bullets I added was help us change the narrative. Help us advocate for this community regarding homelessness. I would tell people, I said, you learned all this information today about Family Promise and the unhoused community. So now I challenge you, you listened. Now I'm asking you to learn with the intent to understand. Now let's act. And what does act look like for you? It could be just mentioning at your dinner table or your circle of friends. But helping us change the narrative. And then something else that we're doing is we're putting together a policy advocate committee so that we are doing our due diligence to connect with legislators to find out, where are we aligned when it comes to different initiatives that are going forth that we may not be aware of. And then where do we need either more visibility or our voice amplified? Just being able to have a committee of legislators who can actually speak into our work, and we can say these are some barriers that we're facing. How do we remove these barriers?
What is the effect on homelessness on our children in our community and their future and their opportunity?
Yeah. So there's several different factors. One is, depending on the history of the child, like if there's, what we tend to see is a generational pattern. So meaning if this child is facing homelessness, it's likely that their grandparents faced homelessness, as well. And so you start to see a trend there until someone intervenes. But something else that you see is people that may be experiencing homelessness and say they're with child, if they're not getting the care that they need, you're seeing low birth rates, you're seeing birth defects. It's even impacting development. Like you think of childhood, you think of children that are in school, and there's impacts to development. There is a screening that we do. It's called the Ages and Stages Questionnaire. It's a child development screening. And so you can look at certain ages of that child's journey. So you can look at 0 to 3 months and say, these are the 10 things your child should be doing developmentally. And if that's not happening, there needs to be an intervention, whether it's a learning gap or something in, you say that the healthcare area, whatever that may be. But yeah, there are effects, impacts on the development of children and their learning. I want to share this analogy just because I remember it when I was had a daycare, and I think it's impactful because I can relate it to children that are facing a housing crisis. But I remember I was in this training, and the instructor said, before we start, I want to try an exercise. She said, I want everyone to stand up from your desk. We all stood up. She said, if you slept in a bed last night, so you had shelter, please sit down. She said, if you had breakfast this morning, please sit down. But she said, breakfast can't be Pop-Tarts or cereal. It has to be like a well-balanced meal. Then sit down. And then she asked the question, if you had 8 to 10 hours of sleep, sit down. There wasn't very many people sitting down, and we were adults. And she said, the people that are sitting down are the people that are ready to learn. And she said, now think about kids. Think about kids that don't have a bed to sleep in, so they're not getting sleep. Think about kids that are that have food disparity, that are not getting a solid meal. How in the world do you think they're ready to learn? And so I just thought that was so impactful. And the families that we serve, or families, I won't even say the families that we serve, because once we're serving them, they're getting the resources that they need. But families that maybe aren't able to be served in that way, just imagine the impact on their kids and their learning.
What stories, I'm sure you have many of families and individuals and families and children that you've served. It must feel pretty awesome when you see them no longer need your services because they now have a sustainable housing solution. And I mean, that's got to be a fantastic feeling when you see that with all the hard work you're putting in.
Yeah, no, I agree. One of my favorite stories is a mom who actually lived in Muskegon, and her son needed a kidney transplant. And in order to get the kidney transplant, she was traveling back and forth to Grand Rapids to see what her options would look like. Well, she decided, I'm going to move to Grand Rapids to stay with family in hopes of, being able to get the medical care needed. Well, she wasn't aware that that particular family was facing eviction. And so she moved here from Muskegon just to be homeless. Well, since then, she was able to get into our program. Her son, got the medical care that he needed. She moved into one of our manufactured homes, so she had home ownership. What I love is that she stayed in the manufactured home, and she could have stayed longer, but she said no. She said, give it to someone else. Somebody else can benefit the same way that I did. She said, I'm doing well now. I'm stable. I have a place. Help somebody else. And I just love that because she, benefited from our program, and she will tell you that to this day. She's like one of our biggest advocates. But then she just had that same urge in her that I want to do this for someone else. I want to get out. She's like, I want to remove myself so someone else can benefit from this program. So she will come. She's a part of our Consumer Advisory Council now. She just spoke at our annual pastors' breakfast. She is a huge advocate, and she told us a story. She said, on Fridays is Casual Friday, and we can wear whatever we want. She said, I always wear a Family Promise shirt. We're like, we need to get her more swag.
Yeah. That's awesome.
But I just love that story because she's talking about how her son is thriving, and she said she feels like that happened because we were walking alongside her. Mm-hmm. And every time I hear that story, I just think it's beautiful. So
talk about changing the narrative too. That's so cool. Thanks.
Yeah.
If I can ask one more question on from your role as a leader of a nonprofit organization, especially coming from private industry, like we were talking about before, I believe, it's my opinion, that for our communities to thrive, we need people doing this type of hard work to better our community because many of us don't have the specialization and expertise to help. We need leaders like you and organizations like you and Family Promise and others to do this work on behalf of our community. It's the efficient way to do it and have people passionate about doing it and helping our community as a whole. So what thoughts do you have on ways that those of us who maybe serve on boards or who give to nonprofits, what does it look like for the people doing the work? And how can we make sure that the people doing the work are also able to live fulfilled lives, take care of their families, and not have to sacrifice in doing this important work that we all benefit from? Yeah.
I do think some intentionality around that, would be awesome. Like I was talking about, I'm always exploring ways, how do we recognize our employees because they do, such hard work. But even I think it goes back to some of changing the narrative and perception, because there's this perception that exists. Like, think about teachers. Like, teachers should get paid more. They just should, And I mean, and you think about the nonprofit space, it's not easy to In corporate space, I can leave my job at work. Like I didn't bring it home unless it was just something I wanted to bring home. As far as mentally is what I mean, not like bringing my laptop home, you know. But this work, I bring it home every night. Like in my mind, I'm always thinking, okay, right now, like today, I know we have an outreach list of 29 families that are living in cars, that are living in abandoned buildings in spaces not meant for human habitation because we have nowhere for them to go. And so I think, honestly, when you think about the corporate side, I think a lot of times the funding does go towards the community that you're serving, which it very well should. But I think if we want to really be innovative and elevate things, there shouldn't be this barrier between I would say overhead and the service you provide. It should kind of all be lumped together where people will ask you that. They're like, well, what's your overhead? You know, but you have to think we have to have this staff in order to serve these families. And so just changing the perception, you know, of some of that dynamic, I think would be amazing. Where that starts, that's a good question. Because I'm wondering, like, you know, where does that start? I mean, as a nonprofit, we could set the expectation. You know, it could start with one, and we could set the expectation and say our funding or our revenue is going to be based on this standard of excellence because we want our employees to, you know, have the best experience. And honestly, I feel like that's why you see a lot of turnover in nonprofits because we can't always pay them what they're worth. And that's hard because you lose some good people, you know, in that way. I mean, because when you think about, I think about some people in nonprofit and I think about how much some of the people reported to me made in corporate. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is sad.
I think a follow-up episode, you guys, for overhead and nonprofits is due with Tenisa. Yeah. No, I mean, I think that is such a deep conversation, right, when it comes to that. And again, like hitting on the fact that turnover, especially in fundraising, right? I'm in fundraising, and you know it takes time to develop partnerships with donors in the community, and to get them to trust you, to get them to trust the organization. And yeah, when that turnover's high, you almost have to hit the restart, right? And so it's just tough. But that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah. And you think about like at least in the funding space, you know, depending on the individual, business, foundation, they may have some priorities where they have a certain focus or where they want to focus their funds that year. And you can't fault them for that, you know, but that might mean that individuals in the homeless space may not get served or families may not, you know, get served because there's just a different focus, you know. It's like they're still giving back to the community and making sure great things happen. But in the nonprofit space, it is very, people say that it's competitive with funding, but I feel like we have enough funding in West Michigan where it shouldn't, it doesn't have to be competitive. But I do get it.
And hopefully we as a community understand that the amount of money available and the amount of funding available is what our community needs to support the most vulnerable in our communities. Right. So I really appreciate you sharing that, and because housing is fundamentally important. I appreciate the awareness around how we can help, and would love to hear just a little bit more too about what do you need? How can our community support you and support others doing similar work to what you're doing at Family Promise?
Yeah, for sure. So now that you've learned some information, the first thing I would say is I would challenge you to share it with someone, you know, and help us in, you know, changing the narrative and enlightening people for sure. We also have opportunities for volunteering. We have all kinds of opportunities to volunteer. If you just have someone that's like, I'd rather just make a thank you card or a welcome home banner versus I want to swing a hammer and paint, you know, we have it all. Maybe you want to cook meals. We even have that. So there's so many different volunteer opportunities. There's definitely corporate sponsorship opportunities, and there's always funding opportunities. When I think about our diversion efforts. We spent almost $500,000 on diversion. We spent almost $1.5 million last year just in our partners in housing for manufactured homes, you know. So financially, there's always a need to. And talking about changing the narrative. So I was telling JR this. I said, I've been described by my family as, you know, the phrase, you know, if you see something, say something. That's not me. I am, if you see something, do something. That's just my personality. And I was sharing with JR, I said, a perfect analogy. We were driving to church and I was on the passenger side and we're driving down the street and we're about to cross Wealthy. Well, all of a sudden, cars are just honking like crazy, like trucks, cars. I was like, why are they honking? There is this guy in a wheelchair going across the street, and it's a motorized wheelchair, and he lost power. And they're yelling out of their windows, move. I was like, he lost power. Like, what do you want him to do? My husband was about to say something. I'm all dressed for church, dressed up in a dress. It was too late. I was out the car. And I'm trying to push him across the street and he had the brake on. He didn't know. And I'm like, you know. But to that point, people saw me all dressed up pushing him across the street. Then somebody else gets out of their car, you know, and stop yelling at him out the window. And we pushed him across the street. Because, yeah, I could sit in my car and just say something like, that's just not right. Someone should do something about it. Or I could just jump on my car and go do it myself. And so that's just my personality. I mean, it's nothing wrong with saying something, but if I see something, I want to do something about it.
Yeah, service is contagious, right? I mean, you act it out, live it out. That's huge. Thanks for sharing that story. That's incredible.
That's amazing. I just love the story because if you see something, it is so common that we say something, but just take action, just doing something. The amount of news stories that have highlighted people seeing something, thinking someone else is going to take that action, when and yet nobody took that action. And so I think that's powerful. One thing we love to leave our audience with is thinking about what is something that's a takeaway that we can think about. Is there a book, a movie, experience, something that inspires or encourages you, but also can encourage others to get involved and to do something?
Yeah. So honestly, there are so many ways to get involved, but when I think about inspiration and I think about this movie that's called I Can Only Imagine. I think it's on Netflix right now. I saw it years ago, but it tells a story of someone trying to make it in like the Christian music industry. And this guy is a worship leader. And so as he tries to move into this industry, you know, he keeps getting told, you're just a worship leader. You know, you're not good enough to be, you know, on the platform with like a Amy Grant, I think is a person they featured in there. And so he wrote the song, I Can Only Imagine, but the song was based on a relationship with his dad, where his dad had some abuse issues and he hadn't gotten to a place of forgiving him. So this is a story of forgiveness. This is a story of having hope. And this is a story of this person going from, you know, one place of childhood trauma and not feeling like I'm good enough to really elevating into a dynamic space. And in this part, I don't know how relevant it is, but I think it's cool. His song he wrote, I Can Only Imagine, they weren't going to allow him to sing it. And this was an Amy Grant concert. And so during the movie, she was supposed to sing the song, but she paused and told him to come up and sing it. And so the reason I love this is because I related to like our families. Like I'm a Christian, and there's a scripture that says, hope deferred makes the heart sick. When you're going through trauma, you're unhoused, it's very difficult to have hope. And so to have someone encourage you and move out the way and leave space for you so that you can have an opportunity at success, have an opportunity to be connected to the right people so that you can be elevated. I just love that story. And to be able to forgive yourself so that you can move forward and realize, and this is what I like about Family Promise too, though, is that piece of, you know, we try to reiterate this could happen to anyone. It's not your fault. And so I just love that story because it hits so many components about hope, about forgiveness, where sometimes the forgiveness is forgiving yourself, but leaving space for you to succeed and shine. And that's what I like to believe we do for our families.
It's awesome. Tenisa Frye, I feel like we could talk to you for a couple more hours. I wish we could. But man, thank you so much for sharing the work you're doing. It's truly inspiring. And again, just proud to have you in our community and the work that you're doing. If you're listening right now, I want to encourage you to check out Family Promise and what they're doing. Get involved with volunteering. Check out their website. The cool thing, too, we didn't even really touch on this, is I think there's over 200 Family Promises throughout the country. Is that true?
Yes. Family Promise is a national organization. We have over 200 affiliates.
Perfect. Yeah. So if you happen to be listening in Tampa Bay, Florida, maybe, I don't know, is there one? There's one in Florida, maybe?
Oh, yeah. There's one in Florida. They're all over. We even have Family Promise of Hawaii.
There we go, JR. You always wanted to move.
Let's go.
But no, for real, though, check it out. They're doing great work in the community wherever you're at. And we'd love to continue to support you guys in that work. So,
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
yeah. And if you want to get checked out with Known Profits, follow us on Instagram at Known Profits Pod. We have a Facebook page as well. You can listen on Apple Podcast or Spotify as we continue to highlight some of these nonprofits in our community. Thanks again, guys. It's been a great episode, and we'll talk to you all later.
You go catch some fall leaves.
Catch some Michigan football.
Kyle told me he was gonna be your personal chef for all of your Family Promise events too.
That's awesome.
Yeah, you know, if you like boxed macaroni and cheese, I'm your guy. Craft is my specialty. So, just saying.
Earlier, you were telling us you can make a pumpkin spice latte.
Hey, let's
true?
cut to the outro more, Drew.
I was going to say, we could actually make this a trio. We could get all three of you in the kitchen.
I'll do the
and
dishes.
You could make a meal.
And I'll clean the.
I'll even come and help you.
Okay.